The document stated I was a severely depressive, clinically unstable former clerk, incapable of managing my own daily care or basic financial decisions. I read the words twice, my eyes tracking the heavy indentation of the signature at the bottom of the petition. The ink was a sterile, unforgiving black. It belonged to my father, Arthur Vance. Beside his name, written in a delicate, practiced cursive that once signed my childhood report cards, was the signature of my mother, Eleanor. They were formally petitioning the Supreme Court of the state of New York to declare me mentally incompetent. They wanted a judge to strip away my civil rights, seize my personal bank accounts, freeze my assets, and place my entire life under their direct, absolute supervision. They wanted a permanent conservatorship. Welcome to Vance's ledger. Before I tell you how I walked into room 404 of the New York County Courthouse and systematically dismantled my family's reality, take a second to hit subscribe. Drop a comment below telling me your age and where you are listening from today. I read every single one of them. Let us get into it. The morning they served me the papers, I was sitting at a secluded corner table in an ultra-exclusive member-only coffee lounge in Manhattan's Upper East Side. Outside, a bitter December wind was whipping flurries of snow against the frosted glass windows. Inside, the air smelled of rich roasted espresso beans, expensive mahogany wood, and custom-blended Creed cologne. Manhattan's elite operate on quiet ambition, legacy wealth, and calculated predatory risks. I fit right in. I was tracing a sleek silver Mont Blanc pen down the margins of an 80-page corporate restructuring and hostile takeover agreement. My oat milk cortado sat cooling on a small marble coaster next to my matte black laptop. The screen was flashing live terminal feeds from Bloomberg, a chaotic dance of green and red tickers that dictated the fortunes of the Fortune 500. Suddenly, a sharp, cold shadow fell across the legal text on my table. A man in a heavy, nondescript dark overcoat stood over me. He didn't belong in this lounge. His eyes flicked down from a digital tablet in his gloved hand to my face, scanning my features with mechanical indifference. Audrey Vance. He said it as a flat statement, not a question. Yes, I replied, not lifting my eyes from my paragraph. He reached into his coat and dropped a thick manila envelope onto the table. It hit the marble with a heavy, echoing thud, sliding directly over my multi-million-dollar merger documents. You've been served. Cortado for Audrey. The barista's smooth, melodic voice cut through the soft jazz playing in the lounge at that exact microsecond. The process server turned on his heel and walked out, disappearing into the grey, snowy Manhattan morning. I didn't flinch. I didn't let my heart rate spike. I stared at the brown envelope. The return address, stamped in bold, authoritative lettering in the upper corner, belonged to the New York County Superior Court, Probate and Wealth Division. I slid my thumb under the heavy paper flap, broke the adhesive seal, and pulled out a thick stack of high-grade legal filings. Petition for appointment of permanent conservator of the person and estate. I skimmed the executive summary statement, and a cold, clinical fascination washed over me. My parents had crafted a narrative of pure, unadulterated fiction. They claimed I suffered from severe, unmanageable delusions, debilitating depressive episodes, and a total detachment from financial reality. Under the section designated for the respondent's current occupation, my father had typed, unemployed data entry clerk. They painted a picture of a fragile, broken, isolated woman hiding away in a dingy, rent-controlled apartment on the outer edges of the city. Someone who desperately needed her noble, wealthy parents to step in, take the reins, and save her from her own mental ruin. I did not panic. I did not reach for my personal phone to call them, screaming, demanding an explanation. I am a managing director at a premier street wall hedge fund. I spend my professional life dissecting fraudulent corporate claims, identifying corporate rot, and forcing hostile executives into absolute submission during high-stakes board meetings. To me, emotion is a toxic liability. It is a data defect. I learned to discard it a long time ago. Instead, I read through the petition a second time, analyzing its syntax and legal architecture, the exact way I would analyze an aggressive, poorly constructed short seller report from an opposing firm. My parents had timed this filing with surgical, predatory precision. I checked the digital clock ticking in the corner of my Bloomberg terminal. I was exactly 14 days away from my 40th birthday. That specific date was not a coincidence. It carried the crushing financial weight of a $15 million inheritance. My late grandfather, Garrison Vance, a ruthless shipping tycoon who despised my parents' vanity, had established an ironclad, irrevocable trust before he died. The terms were explicit. The principal and all its massive accrued interest would vest entirely into my name on the day I turned 40. No sooner. My parents had kept the very existence of this trust a secret from me for nearly 2 decades, assuming they could easily find a loophole to absorb the funds into their own failing estates. Now that the hard deadline was staring them down, this emergency conservatorship petition was their desperate 11th-hour mechanism to intercept the money by legally trapping me in a cage of mental incompetence. They expected me to cower. They expected a terrified, low-level clerk to surrender her autonomy without a fight, weeping in a courtroom. They were completely unaware that they hadn't just served legal papers to a helpless daughter. They had just served legal papers to a street wall wolf. They were entirely unaware that I was about to turn their desperate greed into a permanent, devastating public record. The math crystallized in my mind with the chilling clarity of a high-frequency trading algorithm. 14 days. 2 weeks until the calendar flipped to my 40th birthday. 2 weeks until Garrison Vance's irrevocable trust bypassed my parents' desperate grasp, forever transferring $15 million of liquid unencumbered capital directly into my private accounts. The pieces of their legal assault snapped together with cold mathematical precision. This conservatorship petition wasn't born out of a sudden tearful concern for my psychological well-being. It was a frantic 11th-hour corporate heist. If my parents succeeded in convincing a probate judge that I was mentally incompetent, the court would strip away my financial autonomy in a single stroke of a gavel. A designated conservator, namely Arthur and Eleanor Vance, would be granted absolute legal authority to manage my estate indefinitely. In the state of New York, an adult conservatorship is the civil equivalent of a death sentence. It does not merely monitor your spending, it legally erases your personhood. It revokes your right to sign a lease, enter into a binding contract, or manage an investment portfolio. Most terrifyingly, it strips away your right to retain your own independent legal counsel. If they won, I would become a ward of the state, reduced to the legal status of a toddler. Every dollar I generated, every asset I owned, and every medical decision I made would require their written permission. They were fully prepared to annihilate my autonomy to cover their financial tracks. The vesting date would mean absolutely nothing. The $15 million would flow straight into the hands of whoever the court appointed to oversee my broken life. And according to the petition, my parents were graciously volunteering for the job. I traced the crisp edge of the New York County Superior Court filing. They were attempting to steal my inheritance by legally erasing my mind. To pull off a heist of this magnitude, however, they had to fabricate an entire history of psychological instability. They needed a paper trail, fabricated incidents, and compliant witnesses. Knowing the toxic dynamics of the Vance family, I knew exactly who they would recruit first to validate their fiction. I reached for my heavily encrypted phone, leaving my cooling cortado untouched on the marble table. The trap they built it required a scout, a willing participant to feed them information and reassure them that I was the fragile, isolated victim they needed me to be. I tapped the screen and pulled up the profile for my younger brother. Julian Vance was 5 years younger than me, and he resided in an entirely different reality. while I spent my 20s and 30s studying quantitative economic models, mastering data analytics, and working 80-hour weeks in cramped corporate cubicles, Julian resided in a sun-drenched, multi-million-dollar condo in Hamptons. My parents covered his massive mortgage, framing it as a strategic venture capital investment in his career. Julian considered himself a tech entrepreneur, a crypto bro visionary, whose entire digital existence was built on luxury networking events, vaporware startups, and endless tech disruptor buzzwords. He was the family centerpiece, the golden child who mirrored my parents' obsession with surface-level perfection. I was the dark, brooding cloud of reality. He was the brilliant New York sun. I tapped his contact name on my screen and lifted the phone to my ear. I needed to know exactly how deep this conspiracy ran. More importantly, I needed him to believe that I was exactly the fragile, terrified target they had mapped out in their court filing. To win a war of absolute destruction, you must first convince your enemy that you have already surrendered. The line rang twice before his voice cut through the receiver. Audrey. Julian sighed. His voice dripped with a practiced, gentle condescension, the exact tone a clinical psychologist uses with an emotionally volatile patient. I figured you would call today. Did the courier find you? I kept my breathing deliberately shallow, forcing my vocal cords to tighten. I needed to sound cornered, desperate and small. Yes, Julian. What is this? Why are Mum and Dad doing this to me? Why are they trying to take my life away? Oh, sis. He murmured, his false empathy echoing sickeningly through the phone. Please don't escalate. Please don't have one of your episodes. We are doing this from a place of absolute love. We just want you to be safe. You know you've always been prone to severe emotional hysterics. We've been worried about your mental well-being for years. I pulled the phone slightly away from my face, marveling at the seamless delivery. Weaponized corporate therapy language was Julian's specialty. He routinely used words like boundaries, wellness, and holistic protection to camouflage a profound predatory selfishness. He was attempting to gaslight me in real time, wrapping a multi-million-dollar financial heist in the warm, fuzzy blanket of mental health advocacy, while he continued his monotonous script about family support and professional intervention. I quietly opened a secure browser tab on my laptop. I typed his social media handle into the search bar. If my parents were orchestrating a hostile takeover of a $15 million trust, they could not do it alone. They needed Julian to corroborate their fiction. They needed him to testify under oath that I was unstable. And loyalty in the Vance family always carried a very specific price tag. His public profile loaded on my screen. His most recent post had been uploaded a mere 4 hours ago. The high-resolution image displayed Julian posing in a private driveway in East Hampton. He wore designer athleisure, leaning casually against the hood of a brand-new, pristine white electric sports car, a Porsche Taycan Turbo S. The caption read, "Newest addition to the venture journey. So incredibly grateful for new chapters, manifestation, and family blessings." I studied the sleek lines of the vehicle on my screen. A custom-spec'd Taycan Turbo S cost upwards of $160,000. Julian's latest crypto startup had been forcefully liquidated by regulators 3 months ago, and my parents' real estate portfolio was leveraged to the absolute hilt. Neither party possessed the liquid cash to purchase a 6-figure luxury sports car on a random Tuesday morning, unless, of course, the vehicle was purchased on a massive line of credit, secured by the ironclad promise of an impending $15 million windfall. The financial modeling crystallized in my mind. My parents had already spent a significant portion of my inheritance. They had promised Julian a substantial cut of the trust to secure his legal cooperation. The luxury sports car was simply a down payment on his perjury. "Julian," I said, injecting a subtle rhythmic tremor into my words, playing the role of the broken sister flawlessly. The document says they want to take away my financial rights. It says I can't even manage my own bank account. I don't understand. It's not taking away your rights, Audrey, he corrected swiftly, his tone shifting into that of an impatient corporate executive. It's called a guided transition. Mum and Dad are getting older. They can't manage your long-term care forever. That's why I agreed to step in. I'm actually listed as the proposed co-conservator on the filing. We are going to handle your affairs together, as a family. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was almost breathtaking. My brother, a man who had routinely forgotten to pay his own corporate franchise taxes and whose businesses collapsed like houses of cards, was volunteering to govern my entire financial existence. He was eagerly anticipating the day a probate judge would hand him the master keys to my capital, allowing him to siphon off my grandfather's life work to fund his failing tech fantasies. I don't understand, I whispered, keeping my voice cracked perfectly on the final syllable. I go to work every day. I pay my bills. I am perfectly fine. Why do we have to go to a courtroom? Julian sighed, a soft sound of manufactured pity. You've always struggled to grasp reality, Audrey. Your memory distorts things. You isolate yourself in that depressing tiny apartment uptown, entering data for lawyers all day, pretending everything is normal. But you need professional supervision. You can't even see how sick you are. He genuinely believed his own words. My parents had repeated the lie of my mental instability so frequently for so many decades that it had become absolute gospel within the Vance family tree. Because I kept my distance, because I never bragged about my corporate promotions, and because I completely hid my wealth. They assumed my silence was definitive evidence of failure. They truly believed I was a fragile, low-level clerk, drowning in a mediocre life. What happens next week at the courthouse? I asked, letting my voice trail off weakly. Nothing for you to stress over, he said briskly. You just show up to room 404. Our family attorney has everything prepared. Honestly, he said the hearing is just a formality. The judge will quickly review the clinical medical evidence, sign the order, and we can finally get you the intensive residential help you deserve. A formality? I stared at the glossy image of his new Porsche on my screen. The staggering arrogance required to view a Supreme Court conservatorship hearing as a mere rubber stamp meant their legal counsel had assured them of an effortless victory. They assumed I would arrive in court, unrepresented, weeping, bewildered, and utterly incapable of mounting a coherent defense. They expected the judge to take one look at my apparent distress scan, their forged medical reports, and hand over my life without a second thought. Okay, I mumbled, forcing a final note of utter defeat into the receiver. I have to get back to work now. Remember to breathe, Audrey. We are doing this for you, Julian said, and the line went dead. The silence of the member lounge rushed back in, the distant clinking of porcelain, the quiet, hushed chatter of venture capitalists negotiating terms in the background. My brother was driving a luxury vehicle financed by my impending destruction. My parents were actively preparing to stand before a superior court judge and commit felony perjury under oath. They had hired a high-priced attorney who promised them a seamless, uncontested transition of total power. I closed my social media tab and reopened the digitized, secure scan of my true financial empire. The contrast between their fiction and my reality was almost poetic. My actual workspace was a private corner suite on the top floor of Vance Capital in the heart of the financial district. My office featured floor-to-ceiling glass windows, offering a panoramic view of the Statue of Liberty and the churning waters of the Atlantic. My desk was a custom-cut slab of black Italian slate. I managed a fund of 12 razor-sharp quantitative analysts and junior traders, controlling over $1 billion in active capital. I was the apex predator of the street wall civil ecosystem, a woman who broke over-leveraged corporations on the trading floor before the lunch bell rang. My parents had spent 3 decades executing a psychological campaign to make me invisible. They wanted me small, silenced, and completely irrelevant to protect their fragile, debt-fueled ego. They succeeded in erasing me from their social circles, but they failed to realize the inherent catastrophic danger of their strategy. When you force a brilliant analytical mind to operate entirely in the shadows, you remove all of their constraints. By forcing me to build my life away from their sight, they inadvertently gave me the perfect cover to become completely untouchable. They built a cage of glass, locked the door, and never noticed when I simply stepped outside of it to construct a multi-million-dollar empire. I pulled the stapled court document closer, my eyes drifting down to the bottom of the fourth page, settling directly on the signature block of the opposing counsel. The trap was beginning to take shape in my mind, precise, sharp, and lethal. The people who raised me had just declared total war on a woman they didn't even know, and it was time to examine the architect they had hired to dig my grave. My parents built their entire social identity on a volatile foundation of precarious debt and meticulously curated optics. I noticed the structural fractures early. When I was 12 years old, I sat at our grand mahogany dining table in Greenwich, Connecticut, watching through the bay windows as a flatbed tow truck quietly hooked my father's leased Mercedes-Benz from our gravel driveway in the dead of night. The following morning, my mother stood in our Italian marble foyer, her diamond rings catching the light as she gracefully lied to a visiting neighbor. She claimed we had generously donated the luxury vehicle to a high society charity auction in the city. I sat eating my cereal, looked her dead in the eye, and asked why the charity required a midnight recovery operator to hotwire the ignition at 2 o'clock in the morning. That was my original sin. I observed reality, and I articulated it without a financial filter. In the Vance household, prioritizing truth over appearances was treated as a dangerous, treasonous offense. To protect their fragile facade, my parents developed a highly effective predatory defense mechanism. They pathologized my perception. If I pointed out a glaring discrepancy in their tax filings or bank statements, I was imagining things. If I caught them in a blatant financial lie, they claimed I was suffering from severe paranoid delusions. They repeated this fabricated narrative to aunts, uncles, and wealthy family friends, with a rehearsed tone of sorrowful aristocratic resignation. Audrey has such a troubling, overactive imagination, my mother would sigh at country club holiday parties. She struggles so deeply to grasp the real world, my father would add, shaking his head as he sipped his scotch. We are actively seeking intensive professional interventions for her episodes. By the time I reached high school, the extended family treated me like a ticking psychological time bomb. They spoke to me in slow, soothing, patronizing voices. They dismissed my perfect SAT scores and academic achievements as mere manic hyperfixations. I quickly realized that fighting the label was entirely useless. Defending my sanity only made me look more combative, playing directly into the psychological trap they had meticulously constructed. I learned very early that arguing with a dedicated liar only validates their premise. So I stopped fighting. I weaponized their low expectations. I leaned into the isolation, allowing them to believe I was exactly the broken, hollow girl they needed me to be, while I quietly calculated my exit. The day I turned 18, I packed a single nylon duffel bag and moved out of Greenwich forever. I secured full academic scholarships for my undergraduate degree in quantitative economics and eventually for my master's at an Ivy League institution. I never asked my parents for a single dollar. I never invited them to my graduations. I never shared my residential addresses. I understood that keeping them completely away from my accomplishments was the only definitive way to protect those achievements from being claimed tarnished or leveraged by their debt. I communicated with them perhaps twice a year, through brief, tightly engineered phone calls designed to yield zero actual data about my daily existence. During my first year out of graduate school, I took a low-level summer internship filing documents at a downtown legal aid clinic to better understand corporate compliance. I casually mentioned it during one of those rare holiday phone calls. My mother sighed on the other end of the line, expressing a patronizing, humiliating relief that I had finally found simple, repetitive work suited to my limited, fragile capabilities. I never corrected her. For over a decade, I allowed them to believe I was still walking into that cramped basement clinic, sorting manila folders for minimum wage, struggling to navigate basic adult life. I maintained a completely sparse, barren public social media profile, featuring generic landscapes and stock photos of coffee cups to fuel their confirmation bias. Now, staring at the physical manifestation of their decades-long scheme in the Manhattan Coffee Lounge, I prepared to execute the ultimate short position on their arrogance. I folded the New York County Superior Court documents precisely along their original creases and slid them into my leather brief. My parents wanted a defenseless broken clerk. I was going to give them exactly that until the moment the gavel fell. To file an emergency conservatorship under completely false pretenses requires an attorney who is either willfully blind or profoundly morally bankrupt. My parents needed an aggressive litigator who would not ask too many inconvenient questions about their asset structures. They needed someone who would push fraudulent paperwork through a crowded probate court without conducting basic due diligence on the respondent. They needed a lawyer who looked at an unemployed data clerk on paper and saw an effortless, guaranteed payday against an unrepresented victim. Marcus Thorne was the exact manifestation of that predatory legal archetype. As I reviewed his corporate profile on my laptop, his digital bar registration numbers confirmed his status. Marcus Thorne, senior partner at Thorne and Legal Associates. He was a man who built a lucrative career on the backs of contested wills, fractured family trusts, and high-net-worth divorces. His marketing budget filled Manhattan billboards and late-night television slots, promising rapid settlements and ruthless, aggressive representation. Behind closed doors, his primary revenue stream relied on intimidating, vulnerable, underfunded heirs, bleeding trusts dry through exorbitant hourly fees and burying opponents in mountains of frivolous discovery paperwork. He was a legal scavenger, a predator feeding on the margins of family ruin. My parents had sought him out, assuming a man with a flashy reputation would easily terrify me into absolute submission. The poetic, mathematical symmetry of their selection, they almost made me laugh out loud. My mother and father had absolutely no idea who they had hired. More dangerously, Marcus Thorne had absolutely no idea who had hired him. Exactly 14 days ago, I sat in a sleek, soundproof mahogany conference room on the top floor of Vance Capital. I was finalizing a massive multi-million-dollar settlement in a high-stakes corporate espionage and data theft lawsuit. A rival venture capital firm had covertly stolen proprietary algorithmic trading source code from my primary artificial intelligence developer. The opposing counsel, defending the thieves, had strutted into the mediation room with a team of terrified junior associates radiating unearned confidence, attempting to bluff their way out of a multi-billion-dollar federal indictment. That opposing counsel was Marcus Thorne. He had entered those negotiations expecting a standard give-and-take corporate compromise. Instead, he walked directly into an absolute financial ambush that I had spent 6 meticulous months preparing. At Vance Capital, I operate differently than the flamboyant partners who crave public spotlight. I am the architect. I build the quantitative strategy, uncover the fatal data flaws in the opposition, and draft the lethal cross-examination scripts. During that espionage mediation, I remained the unseen force directing the strikes from my terminal. My associates executed the moves, laying out irrefutable cryptographic evidence of intellectual property theft, piercing their corporate veil, and forcing a settlement that effectively decimated Thorne's client and stripped his firm of their quarterly profits. Thorne had left that room sweating through his bespoke tailored suit, humiliated, outmaneuvered, and utterly broken. He knew the terrifying reputation of the lead managing director at Vance Capital, who had orchestrated his defeat. He cursed my corporate title. He feared my firm. But because I delegate the theatrical physical maneuvering to my subordinates, Marcus Thorne had never actually seen my face. He had never heard my voice. He had never connected the phantom partner who dismantled his corporate division to the name Audrey Vance. Now this exact same man sat in his flashy midtown office, reviewing the fabricated medical history provided by Arthur and Eleanor Vance. He looked at the words unemployed data entry clerk and saw a quick, lucrative recovery from the devastating loss he had suffered 2 weeks prior. Hindsighted by greed, he intended to bill my parents hundreds of dollars an hour to file boilerplate templates, trusting that the respondent lacked the mental capacity to mount a defense. A conventional defendant, facing a total loss of civil liberties, would immediately panic, dial the number of a specialized probate attorney, and hide behind a proxy. I am not a conventional defendant, and I do not require a proxy to fight my battles. I closed the bar directory on my laptop screen. I would not hire an outside defense attorney. Bringing in top-tier legal representation at this stage would only alert Thorne to the fact that I possessed immense financial resources and professional power. It would tip my hand, giving him the strategic opportunity to recalibrate his filings or quietly withdraw from the case before the trap snapped shut. The only way to guarantee a catastrophic public and permanent failure for both my parents and their predatory lawyer was to let them believe their initial assessment was entirely correct. I would represent myself. I would walk into room 404, acting pro C, the legal term for individuals advocating entirely on their own behalf. In the eyes of the probate system, pro se litigants are viewed as desperate, uneducated participants who cannot afford proper counsel. Thorne would see me sitting entirely alone at the defense table, and his massive ego would completely override his basic due diligence. The stage was set, the characters were locked in, and they were walking blindly toward a cliff of their own making. The morning after the process server disrupted my routine, I stood perfectly still by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my private corner suite on the top floor of Vance Capital. Below me, the financial district of Manhattan stretched out like an intricate concrete circuit board, frosted with patches of grey winter slush. From this dizzying altitude, the iconic yellow taxicabs creeping down Wall Street looked like tiny, predictable data points, blinking rhythmically in a vast macroeconomic simulation. My office was an intentional architectural monument to absolute precision and corporate dominance. There were no family photographs resting on the shelves, no colourful decorative trinkets to soften the atmosphere, and absolutely no warm tones to invite casual conversation. The walls were completely lined with soundproof dark slate panels, and my desk was a monolithic 500-pound slab of custom-cut black Italian slate. On its smooth surface sat 3 curved ultra-wide monitors displaying real-time global market trends, complex risk arbitrage matrices, and high-frequency automated trading algorithms that I had personally coded from scratch. This was my sanctuary. This was the secure fortress where the fragile, unemployed file clerk my parents had invented actually spent her life wielding systemic financial power. The contrast between their fiction and my reality was not just vast. It was entirely structural, built on a foundation of calculated anonymity. Over the last decade, I had systematically weaponized their own arrogance against them. By letting my family believe I was a low-level data drone working for minimum wage in a basement legal aid clinic, I had secured something far more valuable than public recognition, total unadulterated anonymity. In the high-stakes predatory world of quantitative finance, absolute anonymity is the ultimate competitive advantage. While flashy hedge fund managers babbled on CNBC and hosted vanity galas to satisfy their egos, I operated like a stealth nuclear submarine beneath the surface. I structured Vance Capital through a highly complex multi-layered web of Delaware shell companies, blind trusts, and anonymous LLCs. Even the main building's directory on the ground floor listed my entire floor under a generic, unidentifiable asset management holding name. I didn't just manage a fund. I was the chief architect of hostile corporate takeovers. My daily routine involved identifying over-leveraged corporations, analyzing their hidden structural rot, and aggressively shorting their stock, while executing precise, devastating boardroom coups. I was the person desperate CEOs called when their companies were facing total annihilation, and I was the nightmare that rival funds tried to avoid at all costs. I routinely billed out my strategic consulting at $2,500 an hour, and my personal net worth, entirely separate from my grandfather's impending trust, was already deep into the eight-figure range. Yet to Arthur and Eleanor Vance, I was merely a psychological charity case hiding from the world. I looked down at the physical court filings resting on my black slate desk. My father's typed words seemed almost farcical when viewed next to the live Bloomberg terminal feeds flashing on my monitors. Respondent exhibits a severe inability to engage in normal societal functions, retreating to a state of extreme isolation and menial labor. They had catastrophically mistaken my strategic silence for absolute failure. They assumed that because I didn't live in a flashy estate in Greenwich, or brag about my connections at their country club holiday dinners, I was drowning in poverty and psychological ruin. Their confirmation bias was so profound that they had spent 30 years inventing an imaginary broken daughter, a helpless, hysterical girl who would instantly crumble into tears the moment a legal document hit her table. When you grant a brilliant, analytical mind total anonymity, you remove all of their institutional constraints. By forcing me to operate completely in the shadows during my youth, my parents had inadvertently given me the perfect laboratory to become completely untouchable. They had built a cage of glass, locked the door, and never noticed when I simply stepped outside of the perimeter to construct an empire that could buy and sell them 10 times over. I checked my watch. 13 days remained until my 40th birthday. 13 days until the $15 million irrevocable trust officially vested into my private accounts. The timeline was tightening, and my family was moving with frantic, debt-fueled urgency to intercept the capital. They genuinely believed they were executing a seamless, uncontested rubber stamp operation against a defenseless broken target. They didn't realize they had just walked onto a lethal battlefield, armed with a plastic knife, challenging the exact sniper who had already proven she could hit them between the eyes from a mile away. It was time to pull the curtain back on the legal mercenary they had hired to dig my grave. I sat back in my ergonomic leather chair, pulled my primary laptop closer, and opened a secure browser tab to access the New York State Bar Association's private practitioner directory. I typed the precise license number printed directly beneath the sprawling, arrogant signature at the bottom of the petition. Marcus Thorne. Senior Partner Thorne and Legal Associates. Active status. 0 public disciplinary actions. I traced my index finger across the glass screen, analyzing the digital profile of the man my parents had selected to orchestrate my civil execution. The digital footprint was exactly what I expected from a predatory litigator. Thorne's firm didn't survive on the prestige of airtight legal briefs, flawless appellate arguments, or meticulous case law research. They operated entirely on sheer volume psychological intimidation and high-gloss television marketing. Thorne was a legal scavenger who fed exclusively on the internal rot of wealthy collapsing families. His primary revenue stream was built on exploiting the emotional fractures of estate disputes, contested wills, and multi-million-dollar divorces. He knew that when wealthy relatives turn on each other, logic completely evaporates, and raw emotion takes over the ledger. He weaponized that volatility, purposefully escalating conflicts to bleed trusts, dry through exorbitant hourly fees, while burying underfunded opponents in mountains of frivolous discovery paperwork. In the specialized insular arena of probate court, Thorne was a master of a specific brand of legal kidnapping. He understood the flawed dynamics of the institutional system perfectly. When a family files an emergency petition for a permanent conservatorship, the constitutional burden of proof technically rests on the petitioner. But in reality, the toxic courtroom atmosphere instantly shifts that heavy weight onto the defense. An unrepresented individual standing before a probate judge, accused of profound mental instability by their own flesh and blood, is instantly trapped in an architectural paradox. If the target attempts to argue aggressively, they appear combative and manic to the court evaluators. If they weep or show vulnerability, they appear emotionally volatile and unstable. The system is fundamentally designed to protect the vulnerable, yet in the hands of an unscrupulous attorney like Marcus Thorne, it becomes a terrifying instrument of institutional theft. Thorne's entire career was built on forcing swift, terrified capitulations from his victims. He specialized in dragging anxious, blindsided targets into emergency hearings, trusting that they would panic and sign away their autonomy just to make the legal nightmare stop. My parents had sought him out because they wanted a ruthless, billboard-faced mercenary who would terrify their file clerk daughter into absolute submission before the trust could vest. The profound cosmic irony of their selection made a cold smile touch my lips. Marcus Thorne had absolutely no idea whose name was actually stamped on that probate intake form. He looked at the document, saw the words "unemployed data entry clerk," and viewed this case as an effortless, guaranteed payday, a swift, lucrative recovery from the devastating financial and professional defeat he had suffered exactly 14 days ago in a closed-door corporate espionage mediation. He didn't realize that the nameless, invisible managing director from Vance Capital, who had completely decimated his firm's quarterly profits, humiliated his legal team, and left him sweating through his bespoke suit, was the exact same woman he was currently trying to declare mentally incompetent. Because I always stayed behind the curtain during major disputes, letting my junior associates execute the theatrical maneuvering at the podium. Thorne had never actually seen my face in a courtroom. Hindsighted by greed and wounded pride, he assumed he was hunting a wounded animal in an isolated thicket. He didn't know he was stepping onto a highly calculated minefield, blindly pulling the pin on a grenade that would permanently detonate his entire professional career. I closed the State Bar directory window on my screen. The strategic formulation was now complete, and the pieces were locked into place. A conventional defendant would immediately call a high-priced probate firm, pay a massive retainer, and mount a loud defensive counterattack. But I am a short seller at heart. I don't defend. I wait for the overvalued target to overextend, and then I crush them under the weight of their own fraudulent claims. I would not hire a lawyer to represent me. I would let them walk into room 404 of the New York County Courthouse, thinking they were playing an uncontested, simple game. I would give them the exact illusion of total victory they craved right up until the moment the trap snapped shut. The trap required a catalyst, a definitive piece of evidence that would transform my family's civil maneuver into a catastrophic, irreversible criminal liability. I returned my attention to the thick manila envelope, resting on my black slate desk, methodically leafing past the boilerplate legal declarations until I reached the section labeled Exhibit A, Clinical Psychiatric Evaluation. According to New York State probate law, a judge cannot grant an emergency conservatorship based solely on the bitter testimony of angry relatives. The petitioners must present an objective licensed medical professional willing to certify that the respondent poses an immediate danger to themselves or their assets. My parents had known this requirement was coming, and they had prepared for it by procuring a weaponized piece of paper. I examined the letterhead. The evaluation was stamped by the Vance Psychiatric Institute, located in Boston, Massachusetts. At the bottom of the clinical assessment was the signature of Dr. Julius Vance, a distant third cousin of my father, who ran a boutique cash-only therapy practice, catering to wealthy families who required discreet, customized diagnoses to settle internal corporate or domestic disputes. Julius Vance was a medical mercenary who wore a white coat. He was a man who traded his clinical ethics for elite social access, expensive research grants, and substantial off-the-books cash consultations. I began reading his formal evaluation of my mental state, and the sheer level of detail within the fabrication was almost mesmerizing. Julius had meticulously documented a history of paranoid schizophrenia, severe bipolar manic episodes, and a chronic inability to process objective reality. He wrote that I suffered from vivid, unmanageable auditory hallucinations that directly prevented me from making rational economic decisions. To give this fraudulent document the necessary veneer of legal invincibility, Julius had to manufacture a physical encounter. A remote diagnosis would be immediately thrown out by any competent court evaluator. Therefore, the document explicitly stated that I had driven up from Manhattan to Boston exactly 3 weeks ago, on November 7th at 10 a.m., to undergo a mandatory 3-hour in-person clinical evaluation at his private office. The report stated that during this physical exam, I was visibly disheveled, incoherent, actively hallucinating, and completely incapable of remembering my own social security number. The document concluded with his formal sworn medical recommendation that I be placed under a permanent comprehensive estate conservatorship without delay. I stared at the date and time stamped in the report, November 7th, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. A cold, clinical sense of absolute triumph washed over me. I pushed my chair back from the slate desk, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time since the process server had entered my life. My family's profound arrogance had finally caused them to make the one fatal error that every amateur criminal makes when fabricating a paper trail. They failed to verify the immutable data footprint of their target. On November 7th, at exactly 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I was not sitting in a plush leather chair in a medical office in Boston. I was sitting in the ultra-secure biometric locked boardroom of Vance Capital in downtown Manhattan, executing the most significant transaction of my professional career. I pulled up the digitized corporate archive on my center monitor. On that exact morning, at that precise minute, I was directing a live high-frequency corporate restructuring meeting with the managing director of the Bank of England and 3 senior compliance officers from the Federal Reserve. The entire meeting was conducted via a highly secure, encrypted enterprise software network that automatically recorded the session for federal regulatory compliance. The high-definition digital video file clearly displayed my face, completely sharp, professional, and composed, as I articulated a complex macroeconomic strategy for over 2 hours. The digital data footprint did not stop there. Because Vance Capital handles sovereign wealth assets, our office security infrastructure is managed at a federal clearance level. To enter the boardroom on November 7th, I had to pass through 3 separate biometric checkpoints. The network logs recorded my unique retinal scan and thumbprint at exactly 8:45 a.m., 9:55 a.m., and 12:15 p.m. Furthermore, my personal iPhone, which sits on a continuous encrypted cloud backup managed by an independent cybersecurity firm, placed my physical GPS coordinates firmly within the financial district of New York throughout the entire day. Dr. Julius Vance had not merely drafted a biased medical opinion. He had committed flagrant documented perjury. He had signed a sworn declaration under penalty of perjury before a notary public fabricating a physical medical examination out of thin air to assist my parents in executing a multi-million-dollar financial kidnapping. In the state of New York, presenting a knowingly fraudulent medical document to a superior court judge to strip a citizen of their civil liberties is not a minor procedural infraction. It is a Class D felony carrying a mandatory state prison sentence. By attempting to manufacture a fake mental illness to steal my grandfather's trust, my parents and their compliant doctor had handed me the exact weapon I needed to permanently destroy their lives. I systematically compiled the evidence, organizing the data points, with the cold efficiency of a forensic accountant preparing a federal racketeering indictment. I pulled up the encrypted server where my private assets were held and began downloading the certified, unedited video recordings of the November 7th boardroom meeting. I secured the verified biometric access logs from our building's engineering department, ensuring each document carried a certified digital cryptographic timestamp that could never be challenged or altered by a forensic expert. Next, I accessed my personal financial ledger, printing out 12 consecutive months of immaculate tax filings, high-yield investment statements, and corporate ownership certificates. My parents had stated under oath that I was a destitute, unemployed clerk living in poverty. I was about to present a financial reality that would make the probate judge's jaw drop. I printed out the official corporate registration of Vance Capital, revealing that I owned 70% of the voting shares in a fund currently managing over $1.2 billion in active assets. I attached my personal banking records from JP Morgan Chase, displaying a liquid checking balance of $4.2 million issuance, entirely independent of my grandfather's trust. I did not place these documents into a standard legal binder. I kept them neatly sorted within a slim, unbranded black leather folder. If I hired a process server to deliver these counter-evidences to Marcus Thorne's office today, he would instantly recognize the catastrophic danger. He would realize that his clients had lied to him, that his target was a street-wall wolf, and he would quickly file an emergency motion to withdraw the petition, attempting to bury the entire affair before his reputation was permanently destroyed. I had absolutely no intention of letting him escape the trap. I wanted Marcus Thorne to walk into that courtroom with maximum confidence. I wanted my parents and my brother Julian to sit at the petitioner's table smiling, believing they were minutes away from rubber-stamping my civil execution. The absolute destruction of an overvalued asset requires you to let the market reach its absolute peak of irrational exuberance before you pull the floor out from beneath it. I checked the countdown on my Bloomberg terminal. 7 days remained until the hearing in room 404. 7 days until my 40th birthday. I spent the final week operating in complete, chilling silence. I did not block my brother's phone number, nor did I reach out to my parents. When Julian sent me a patronizing text message reminding me to wear something neat and respectable for the judge, I replied with a single compliant sentence. I will be there, Julian. I just hope everything goes quickly. I could almost hear the triumphant clinking of champagne glasses in the Hamptons condo when that text message delivered to his device. They truly believed the prey had laid down to die. On the final night before the hearing, I left my office at Vance Capital late. The city was covered in a fresh layer of pristine white snow, the bright neon lights of Times Square reflecting off the frozen asphalt like a vivid neon dream. I walked down the quiet, cavernous corridors of my office building, nodding politely to the night shift security guards who kept watch over my financial empire. I stepped into the back of my private black town car, the heated interior offering a sharp contrast to the freezing Manhattan air outside. As the driver navigated the quiet streets toward my penthouse apartment, I opened my briefcase and took one final look at the black leather folder containing my counterattack. My parents had spent 30 years trying to convince the world that I was a broken, insignificant ghost because they could not control my mind. They had weaponized the legal system, corrupted a medical professional, and bought my brother's loyalty with a luxury sports car, all to steal a $15 million inheritance that my grandfather had built to protect me from their greed. They believed that tomorrow morning inside room 404 of the New York County Courthouse, they would finally complete my erasure. They believed they were walking into a standard probate hearing to collect an effortless fortune. They had absolutely no idea that they were walking directly into a public execution of their entire social and financial existence. Tomorrow, the fragile data clerk would step aside, and the managing director of Vance Capital would take the podium to dismantle their reality forever. The board was perfectly set. The pieces were locked into their final coordinates, and it was finally time to play the game to its absolute devastating conclusion. The air inside room 404 of the New York County Courthouse was thick with the scent of old mahogany floor wax and the quiet, suffocating dread of probate law. Outside the tall windows, The Manhattan skyline was obscured by a heavy slate-grey sky that threatened another historic winter blizzard. Inside, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock marked the final minutes of my 39th year. At exactly 9 a.m., my family took their seats at the petitioner's table. They looked like an advertisement for old money New York prestige. My father, Arthur Vance, wore a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit, his silver hair immaculate. Beside him, my mother Eleanor sat wrapped in a tailored camel hair coat, adjusting her pearl necklace with an air of delicate aristocratic sorrow. Behind them sat my brother Julian, nervously twirling the keys to his brand-new Porsche Taycan around his index finger. At the center of their line stood Marcus Thorne, adjusting his bright silk tie, radiating the absolute unearned confidence of a wolf about to slaughter a tethered lamb. I sat entirely alone at the defense table. I wore a plain, unbranded black crewneck sweater and dark trousers, my hair pulled back tightly. I had placed my slim, unbranded black leather folder flat on the table before me, keeping it completely closed. When Marcus Thorne glanced over at me, his eyes filled with a patronizing, dismissive pity. He leaned down to whisper a joke to my father, who smirked, nodding in agreement. They looked at me and saw the fiction they had spent 30 years manufacturing: a broken, terrified, unrepresented data clerk waiting for her civil execution. "All rise for Honorable Judge Evelyn Vance Holgate," the bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom. Judge Holgate was a legendary no-nonsense jurist who had spent 2 decades presiding over Manhattan's most complex estate disputes. She adjusted her reading glasses, opened the master case file, and looked down over her high bench with a sharp, analytical gaze that instantly froze the room. "We are here today regarding the emergency petition for a permanent conservatorship over the person and estate of Audrey Vance," Judge Holgate announced, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The petitioners allege severe mental incompetence, financial vulnerability, and an immediate necessity for total estate intervention. Mr. Thorne, you may introduce your primary clinical evidence." Marcus Thorne stepped forward to the center podium, throwing his shoulders back with theatrical flair. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is a deeply tragic case of family tragedy. As detailed in our comprehensive filing, the respondent Audrey Vance has spent her adult life suffering from profound, unmanageable delusions, severe psychological instability, and a total detachment from financial reality. She hoards cash lives in complete isolation and works a menial, low-level data entry job that leaves her utterly incapable of navigating adult society." Thorne picked up a document from his desk, lifting it high into the air. "To validate this urgent emergency petition, we have provided Exhibit A sworn, notarized in-person clinical psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Julius Vance of the Vance Psychiatric Institute. Dr. Vance physically examined the respondent exactly 3 weeks ago on November 7th at 10 a.m. at his clinic in Boston. His professional conclusion is absolute. Audrey Vance poses an immediate danger to her own assets and requires immediate permanent legal guardianship." "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," Judge Holgate said, her face completely unreadable. She turned her sharp eyes directly toward me. "Ms. Vance, you are appearing pro se today without legal counsel. Do you understand the gravity of these proceedings, and do you wish to present a response to Exhibit A?" I stood up slowly, keeping my movements perfectly fluid and calm. The fragile, trembling sister Julian had heard on the phone a week ago had completely vanished. I picked up my slim black leather folder, opened it with deliberate precision, and adjusted the microphone before me. "I do, Your Honor," I said. My voice resonated through the courtroom with the cold, commanding authority of a street-wall executive directing a multi-billion-dollar corporate liquidation. Marcus Thorne blinked, his posture stiffening slightly at the sudden, unexpected shift in my vocal cadence. "Your Honor, the entire petition before you is not a legal document," I stated calmly. "It is a fraudulent criminal mechanism designed to execute a multi-million-dollar asset hijacking. Today is my 40th birthday. At exactly 4 p.m. today, a $15 million irrevocable trust established by my late grandfather Garrison Vance is legally mandated to vest entirely into my private accounts. This emergency conservatorship was filed by my parents for the sole desperate purpose of freezing those assets to cover their own immense hidden corporate debts. "This is an outrageous manic outburst," Thorne shouted, stepping forward aggressively. "Your Honor, the respondent is actively demonstrating the exact paranoid delusions detailed in Dr. Vance's certified medical report." "Quiet, Mr. Thorne." Judge Holgate snapped her gavel, hitting the wooden block with a sharp crack. "Let the respondent speak." "Thank you, Your Honor." I continued, sliding the first document from my folder. "Let us look at the objective data. Exhibit A states under penalty of perjury that Dr. Julius Vance conducted a 3-hour in-person clinical evaluation of my person in Boston on November 7th at exactly 10 a.m. I lifted my document, handing a copy directly to the bailiff to pass up to the bench. "I am submitting the certified, unedited video recordings and biometric access logs from Vance Capital located at 40 Wall Street. On November 7th at 10 a.m., I was physically present in our high-security boardroom, directing a high-frequency corporate restructuring meeting with senior compliance officers from the Federal Reserve and the managing director of the Bank of England. My unique retinal scan and thumbprint were recorded at our vault doors at 9:55 a.m. and 12:15 p.m. I turned my head slightly, looking directly at my parents, whose faces had suddenly turned a ghostly ashen white. Furthermore, I have attached the certified GPS network data from my personal mobile provider, placing my physical coordinates firmly within the financial district of New York throughout that entire day. Dr. Julius Vance never examined me. He fabricated a fraudulent medical document to assist in an institutional theft. That is a Class D felony perjury under New York state law. Marcus Thorne's jaw dropped. He whipped his head around to look at my father, his hands beginning to visibly tremble as he realized the catastrophic nature of the trap he had walked into. My father was staring at the table, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead, while my mother clutched her pearl necklace so tightly the string looked ready to snap. "Furthermore," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence of room 404 like a scalpel. "The petition claims I am an unemployed, destitute data clerk, incapable of managing financial assets. I am submitting the certified corporate registration of Vance Capital and LLC. I am the founder majority shareholder and managing director of this fund. We currently manage $1.2 billion cause inactive assets. I have also attached my personal liquid banking statements from JP Morgan Chase, displaying an independent cash balance of $4.2 million. I took a final step forward, my eyes locking onto my brother Julian, who had completely stopped spinning his Porsche keys. My younger brother was bought with a $160,000 sports car, financed by a line of credit, secured against my grandfather's trust, explicitly to provide false testimony today. I request that this court immediately dismiss this fraudulent petition with prejudice." Judge Holgate read through the documents, her face darkening with immense judicial fury as she looked down at the petitioner's table. She slammed her gavel down with a sound that signaled the permanent end of the Vance family legacy. "This petition is dismissed with prejudice," Judge Holgate roared. "Mr. Thorne, you and your clients have committed a monstrous fraudulent abuse of this court. I am forwarding these biometric logs and perjured medical documents directly to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal indictment. Bailiff, secure the room." I systematically closed my black folder, zipped my briefcase, and turned my back on the weeping, ruined figures of my family. The high-stakes liquidation was complete. As I walked out of room 404 into the crisp Manhattan air, the clock struck 4 p.m., and $15 million quietly cleared into my account. The game was over, and the ledger was finally settled.